In life, there are only two things to worry about. Either you're going to be rich or you're going to be poor. If you're rich, there's nothing to worry about. And if you're poor, there's only two things you have to worry about. Either you're going to be healthy or you're going to be sick. Now, if you're healthy, there's nothing to worry about. And if you're sick, there's only two things to worry about. Either you're going to live or you're going to die. If you live, there's nothing to worry about. And if you die, there's only two things to worry about. Either you go to heaven or you go to hell. If you go to heaven, there's nothing to worry about. And if you go to hell, you're going to be so darn busy shaking hands with all your friends that you won't have time to worry. I think Georgie gave me that one, actually, because she was saying it as I was saying it. Worry. Why worry? Why worry? A teacher of mine who I never met, but he's still a teacher of mine, he's kind of the founder of self-help, if you will, of motivational philosophy, psychology, Earl Nightingale, studied worry and broke it down into the following. 40% of our worries are things that never actually happen. 30% of our worries are things in the past that no matter how much you worry, you can't change them one iota. 12% of our worries are needless worries. 10% are petty, miscellaneous worries. That leaves, do the math, 8% of our worries that are legitimate, that are real. So the question stands, right? Why worry? And the answer is because we're Jews. That's what we do. It's part of our mother's milk. There's a famous Jewish telegram, remember that? Start worrying, details to follow. That's kind of how the Jewish people have approached life since the time of the Torah. Start worrying, details to follow. It's not just being Jewish, it's being an American, it's being a concerned human being, because there is plenty to worry about. As a Jew, until that number is 0% and not 8%, I think we have some legitimate worries. Just open the paper today and read about how Canadian diplomats are leaving Iran because they feel like we're on a crash course for either military action or them securing nuclear weapons. Read about in today's, I think it was Wall Street Journal, I guess yesterday's, how Syria is missing some chemical weapons, and they're trying to figure out where they are. You can read about all of the turmoil in Egypt and the Middle East. There are so many things to worry about that we haven't even gotten into personal worries yet. We could stay here until Yom Kippur, until Ne'ilah, the closing of the gates, and each of us could articulate all of the personal worries we have about family and health and the Red Sox. It is endless, the amount of things we could come up with to worry about. That's the way it is. That's how we're built. It's not enough to say, why worry? It's not enough to throw statistics at our worries, because Judaism is a religion that deals with what is real, strives towards the ideal, but we don't as Jews live in the ideal. We live on this earth, and on this earth we need to be real. And worry is real. But worry is also dangerous, and it needs to be dealt with, which is where this week's Torah portion goes. Before we get to this week's Torah portion, we go back to the very first time that I could find we have worry in the Torah. The very first story of the Torah is really all about worry. When you look at the story of Adam and Eve, right, just to refresh ourselves, Adam and Eve, they meet, they fall in love, they go on a honeymoon. The honeymoon doesn't last. The rabbis debate, actually, how long did the honeymoon last? The longest was a few weeks, but the shortest was not even 24 hours before the relationship fell apart. And why did it fall apart, right? What broke up this blissful union in the garden? According to the text, it's a walking, talking snake, a serpent. Now, the serpent was the most arun, the most subtle, crafty, clever of any beast of the field which God had made. And he said to the woman, "Has God said you shall not eat of the tree of the garden?" That's all that the serpent had to do, and his work was done. What did God actually say to Adam, who then reported it to Eve? Eve never spoke to God. She only got it through Adam. God actually said, you can eat of any tree in the garden except for the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so already the snake is kind of taking an idea and twisting it in her head, and that is because I don't believe in walking, talking snakes. I hope you don't believe in walking, talking snakes. If you do, Dr. Howie, who chanted Haftarah, is here to consult. We shouldn't believe in walking, talking snakes because this is an idea. The word for snake in the Bible is nachash. The word nachash in Hebrew, lenachesh, is to guess. It's doubt. What has happened to Eve? Guesswork has entered into the equation. Worry has turned into doubt, has turned into anxiety, has turned into fear. She's wondering, if Adam told me one little lie, maybe he's told me a lot of lies. And by the way, where is he all this time? Why am I here alone? He's always out in the garden, so he says. And from there, it goes from bad to worse. And this worry unchecked drives these two out of the garden and out of each other's lives. Because that's what worry does. That's what the nachash is all about. And don't think for the second that the nachash, the snake, this element of doubt is not real. V'hanachash haya arum mikol chayat hasadeh. The nachash, this doubt is the most real of anything that lived in their garden or that lives in our garden. And left unattended, worry will take our garden. It will destroy our lives. And that's what today's Torah portion deals with. Indirectly at first. You don't quite get it until you look a little bit prior to this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion, Ki Tavo, is about the Israelites entering the land of Israel for the first time. The first thing God says to them is, when you get to the land of Israel, plant your crops, right? Grow your fruit trees, harvest for the first time, and then bring your first offerings before you've even before you've even eaten from this fruit and from your harvest. You have to give some of it away, the first tenth of it away, actually. The only way you can understand that is to deal with the number one worry leading up to this moment. And what was the number one worry of the Israelites? It wasn't that the Egyptians were pursuing them. It wasn't Pharaoh. It wasn't plagues. It wasn't any external mortal enemy. What did we see time and again up until this Torah portion? We saw a people consumed with worry over, I know it's hard to believe as Jews, food, right? They were worried about food. What kind of food? Would there be enough food? The type of food? Manna wasn't good enough. They wanted quail. Then there was too much quail. And if it wasn't food, it was water. I mean, think about the worry they had over water brought Moses to that moment of anger, blowing his lid, keeping him out from the land of Israel. He's punished because of that moment regarding food and regarding water, but really surrounding not food and water, but a fearfulness, a worry left unchecked about where the food would come from, about whether or not they were safe and they were secure and they were sound. So the first thing God says is when you get to the land of Israel, check your worries at the door. Deal with your worries before your worries overtake your garden. So take your worries head on. So what do? You give over the first of your fruits. Mark Twain once said, "Do the thing you fear the most, and death of the fear is all but certain." You can just change that to worry. Do the thing that you worry about the most, and death of the worry is maybe not all but certain, but certainly it's a start. If you're fearing lack of food, then give some away. If you fear like you have a lack of resources, of money, the tradition says give tzedakah, which is exactly why it says in the halakha, Jewish law, that even the poor have to be given enough so that they can give tzedakah, because we need to deal with our worries, and one way to deal with the worries is to enter it, to take it head on, to give it away. If you're worried about public speaking, right, you should put yourself in situations where you're forced to speak. If you're worried about heights, you should go to the Empire State Building, go to the top. I know it's easier said than done, but this is what our tradition demands from us to do, right? If you're worried about something, you must not sit and be a victim and wait until it overtakes your garden, because it will eventually overtake the garden. That's what the nachash always tends to do. There was a second part, however, of this Torah portion. It says that in addition to dealing with your worries by taking them head on, recite something. Recite the words from the Haggadah. We say in the Haggadah, Arami Oved Avi, an Aramaean sought to destroy my forefather, my foremother, and he went down to Egypt and sojourned there with a small number of people, and there he became a great and mighty and numerous nation. So what do? You get to the land of Israel, you give over your fruit because you're worried about where your next meal will come from, and then you make this statement, because you may not have overcome your worries by taking them head on, but at the very least, remind yourself, says God, who you are and where you come from. Yes, you're in the land of Israel, but you're only there because the people that came before you went through hell and back to get you to where you are today. What you're facing is nothing compared to what your ancestors faced. And I'm sure they dealt with worry. And I'm sure they dealt with doubt. And I'm sure they dealt with fear, says God. But look at what they did. They went down to Egypt as a nobody, and they arose as Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. I always think it's so interesting that that's what we're called, Bnei Yisrael. We could have been called Bnei Yaakov, the children of Jacob. He's the same man. The first part of his life, he's Jacob. Later in life, he's Yisrael. So what's the difference? Everything. This is not the same man. Jacob, Ekev, was a young boy who was literally holding onto the Ekev, the heel of his brother, Yaakov, holding onto the heel of his brother, Esav, defining himself by his brother, insecure, worried about not being his brother, worried about not having the birthright, worried about not being the blessed child. This is a young man who causes havoc in his world because of the worries. His garden is overtaken to the point where he has to flee. And then years later, one night in the desert, he stands up and he becomes Yisrael. How? By facing his worries, facing his doubts, facing his fears, and battling back. It says that he wrestled with angels and with God and with everything in between: worry, doubt, fear, and the like. And it says that his name was changed from Yaakov to Yisrael because he wrestled with God and he would not relent. That's why we're called Bnei Yisrael, to remind ourselves that we are children of desert warriors. That's who we are, men and women who never gave up. And that's what we're here to do, to get ready for the high holy days. Yes, you got to go make your wrongs right. You have to go talk to people that you've hurt. You have to say Slicha, I'm sorry, and mean it, and do whatever you can to repair the relationship. You have to come tonight and on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and stand before God. But you also have to go to the mirror and look at yourself and say, I'm sorry for not being the man, for not being the woman that I know I was meant to become. Part of that comes down to this idea of worries, that we disappoint not the world around us, but at some level we disappoint ourselves when we allow those worries to define us, to define our choices. You know, the word worry is interesting. It comes from the Anglo-Saxon, which is connected to suffocate and strangle, and that's exactly what worry does. It suffocates our ability to see clearly, to act with courage, to do what we know needs to be done. That's what we have to apologize to ourselves for, is having been suffocated and strangled, allowing the nachash, the snake, to choke off our sense of courage in the world. And so that's what we're doing. We're getting ready for the high holidays, and we're taking a good look at ourselves. We're taking a good look at our garden. Each of us has a lot of gardening to do. You have to do nothing, right, to bring forth weeds. It takes a tremendous amount of work to bring forth the flowers. So we begin today, actually tonight, and you'll join us as we begin to do some spiritual gardening of our own. I'll end with this, though. My son, a couple of years ago, saw me in a state of worry, and he knows my language and he knows my thesis. And I've been writing a book for 12 years, which just hasn't gotten out yet. It's called Warrior Jew. I just can't get that one out. We have another one coming, but the Warrior Jew one is my soul's book. Warrior Jew. And my son sees me, Yehuda sees me worrying. I was worrying excessively over something, and he looks at me and he says, Abba, are you a worrier or a warrior? Because you can't be both. Sometimes out of the mouth of babes. Are you a worrier or a warrior? Because you can't be both. We are all warriors at different times, different situations, for different reasons. 8% of our worries are legitimate and they are real, and we need to deal with them. However, we are children of Bnei Yisrael, children of spiritual warriors in the desert who lived not lives defined by worry, but lives defined by spirit. Think about that word real quickly. Spirit, coming from inspire, coming from respire, coming from the word to breathe. That's what it means to live an inspired life, a life in spirit, a life where one can take deep breaths, where one feels connected to their nefesh, to their neshama, to their ruach. All of the Hebrew words for soul mean breath, means spirit. That's what we are working towards. That's what we are about as individuals and as a community. This is an open house, so 2 more minutes, just briefly. This congregation is defined by one word and one word alone, and that word is Ruach. Ruach, again, breath and spirit and energy and vitality. That's why it was formed, because 2 dying synagogues were suffocating like most synagogues, like most Jewish institutions around this community and around the country. However, the visionaries in those congregations didn't want to go down as Bnei Yaakov, didn't want to go down without a fight, so they rose up as Bnei Yisrael, and they crafted Shirat Hayam, and they came together and they overcame their obstacles to create an inspired, an in spirit, a Ruach-filled congregation. And that's what we've been doing for the past 7 years. We have been battling back individual worries and communal doubts and collective fears. We have been overcoming the odds. Look around you. This is a congregation defined by that spirit, that's inspired, that is Ruach driven. So if this is your first time here, welcome. If you are looking for a spiritual home committed to these ideas, committed to this Ruach, this spirit, then welcome to your spiritual home. Join us in the Ruach rally. Join us as we have a revolution of Jewish spirit here at Shirat Hayam, taking it out into the world. One word we're going to end with, Amen.